Good morning, learners. Today we are working on lesson 26, session 1. We are learning something new. Actually, we're taking information we already know and starting to do new types of problems. We are going to explore measuring length and plotting data on line plots. Line plots is another new way to organize data. In order to get started with this today, I want to remind you of some of the things that we've done in the past and make sure we're ready with our tools for today. I want you to remember way back in the beginning of all of this, we worked on bar graphs. That was when we took information and we made bars to share the information with others. We also did picture graphs. Remember way back when we did picture graphs? We had information that we needed to organize in a graph, and we used pictures to help us do that. Today, we're going to be working on something called a line plot. Now, you may have seen line plots before, but I want to make sure that you know how to make them. So you don't have this page, but I just want to kind of review the information. Remember, we're going to measure length and plot data on line plots. Line plots are another way to organize data. So for example, down here is a line plot. Let me zoom in for you a little bit here. So notice that we have information, or we have data about dragonfly wings. So someone went out, probably a scientist, or that could have been a kid like you, went out and measured the lengths of dragonfly wings. So here's a dragonfly, just in case you haven't seen a dragonfly before. They can be quite big. So someone went out there with a ruler and they measured the lengths of the dragonfly wings. Now, they found quite a few dragonflies and they named them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So notice that they have, it looks like 9 pieces of information. They gathered the data about the dragonfly wings. Once they have the data, then they created a line plot. Notice that on their line plot, they have how many dragonflies had a wing length of 1/2. So notice up here, let's take a look. Dragonfly A had a wing length of 3/4 of an inch. Dragonfly B had a wing length of 1/2. Dragonfly C had a wing length of 1 1/4. So they sat there and they organized all of the information into our data table. Then they created a line plot. Now, in order to make a line plot, they looked for the smallest number in our data table. What do you notice is the smallest number in our data table? It's the 1/2. So that means we have to at least have 1/2 on our line plot. Then they looked for what is the largest number. These are fractions, so we kind of have to think about them. Which one is the largest number? Look at that, 1 1/2 is our largest number. So that means our line plot has to have 1 1/2 at least as the largest number here. Then they put all the corresponding numbers in between. Now, I'm going to help you learn to make these tables. I just want to make sure you know what they look like before we get started. Now, the second thing that we need to do is make sure that you have your ruler. Now, if you have your ruler, this is a good time to help me get you ready for working with a ruler. So if you need to pause your video and go get your ruler, go ahead and go do that. Now, this ruler is important because not only does it measure in inches, so if we need to, let's label that. It measures in inches. Let's look at how many inches there are. Well, we start at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches. This measures 6 inches. Now, what are those little lines in between? You should be thinking about the fractions that we did earlier this year. So notice if this space between 0 and 1, how many spaces do we have? This 1 inch, how many pieces was it cut into? Notice that I have a 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So this length between 0 and 1 was cut into 4 spaces. So that means this is 1/4, right? Because this is one piece of all 4. Now, in the middle here, this one, we can call this one 2/4. But what's an equivalent name for that? Do you remember we worked on equivalent fractions? What's another way to say 2/4? We could say 1/2. Now this is 1/4, 1/2. What is this one going to be? How many pieces of 4 is this? It is 3/4. So this is a good time to make sure that your ruler has some notation so we know how to read it. So if you need to, go ahead and fill in. This is 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. Now, rulers go all the way up to 6 inches for ours. So what would this one be? Notice that again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. They're using the same spaces between each of our inches. So if this is 1, what is this one? I remember in the beginning, we called that 5/4. Do you remember that? Another way to write 5/4 is 1 1/4. So what would this one be? That one is 6/4, but we also write it as 1 1/2. How about this one? We had named it 7/4, but we could also name it 1 3/4. And here is 2. So this is a good time, if you need to, pause the video and go ahead and keep filling in your ruler so that when we get started and measuring, it's easier to read because our numbers are already there. Okay, now back to our lesson. Oops, I need to zoom out so you guys can see. Here we go. Okay, we are going to explore measuring length and plotting data on line plots. So they have here some pictures for us. Previously, you drew picture graphs and bar graphs. In this lesson, you will measure objects and draw line plots. We're going to measure objects. That means we're going to use our ruler. And we're going to draw line plots. Now remember, I already showed you how we're going to do that, but I'll help you if you get stuck. Use what you know to try to solve the problem below. Use a ruler to measure each pencil to the nearest inch. Create a line plot for your data. Okay, now I want you to measure these. So if you need to pause so you don't feel rushed, then go ahead and pause the video and go and measure each of these pencils. So notice when we're measuring, and I want to make sure, I'm going to zoom in because I want to make sure you guys see how to measure, because I even have big kids in middle school that make a mistake here. Notice when you go to measure, do you see this 0? We have to start at the 0. So don't put your ruler here because then we're not measuring correctly. It's not the end of the ruler. You have to measure at the 0. So now that I have my 0 lined up with the end of my pencil, I can measure. And I'm going to have to see if I can squeeze all of this on at one time. Here we go. My 0. And then notice my length of my pencil goes all the way. Uh-oh, I'm in between. Okay, so notice I don't quite get to the 4, but I'm not exactly at this line. This is the 3 3/4. So let's go back and read the instructions again. Use a ruler to measure each pencil to the nearest inch. Okay, I think I was reading so quickly last time that I didn't catch that. The nearest inch. So is my pencil closer to the 3 inches or is it closer to the 4 inches? It's closer to 4, so I'm just going to put a big 4 right there. Okay, now let me zoom out so we can actually see the whole page. Now this would be a good time to pause your video and go and measure your pencils. So if you want, you can follow along with me. I put my pencil at 0. And this one, look at that, it goes just over the 3. It's not close to the 4 yet, so I'm going to label this one 3. And in C, this is a good long pencil. Here we go, start at the 0. Then I notice my pencil goes, oh, it's not quite to the 5. It's way past the 4. In fact, it's 4 3/4. It's almost 5. So I'm going to say 5 is the nearest inch. Then in D, just put my pencil at 0. Notice that that's almost to 4. I'm rounding right now. I'm estimating. Okay, starting at 0. And this one is, ooh, that one's really close. Look at, here's 4 1/2. So it is past the halfway mark. So that means it's closer to 5. Okay, now that I've labeled them, go ahead and work on a line plot. If you think you can do a line plot on your own, pause the video and make your own and then come back. Otherwise, we'll start making one right now. Okay, to make a line plot, what we need to do is we need to make a number line. You know what? If you want to, use your ruler. That will help you make a line if you want to. Now, on a line plot, we want to show that the numbers keep going in both directions. So we're going to draw arrows on both sides because our numbers can get smaller and our numbers can get larger. Now, we have to have, what is the smallest number that we have for our pencil? It is 3. What's the largest one that we have? It's 5. So our line plot has to have at least a 3 and at least a 5. Now I'm just going to make it look like my ruler. So I'm just going to start at 0. And I'm just going to kind of sketch them in. It doesn't have to be exact. 4, 5, 6. Now there's more than one way to do this. You could have started at 2 and gone to 6. You could have started at 1 and gone to 5. You could have even done just 3, 4, 5. So as long as you have the numbers 3, 4, and 5 on your line plot, you're good. Now what we do is we take the data from our table up here and plug this information in. This pencil A is 4 inches. So I'm going to put an X right where the 4 is. Pencil B is 3 inches. So I'm going to put an X. Pencil C is 5 inches. Put an X. Pencil D is 4 inches. Now, since I already have one here, I just put another X on top. And pencil E is 5 inches. Okay, there is my line plot. I have a line and I've plotted my data. Okay, let's turn the page over, 552. Connect it. Look back. Explain how you found the measurement to the nearest inch for each pencil in order to make your line plot. How did we find the measurements? We used a ruler, right? We used a ruler. Sometimes when we used our ruler, it wasn't quite to the nearest inch, but we looked for the closest inch, right? And then we looked for the nearest inch. In other words, we kind of rounded. We rounded up if it was really close, and we rounded down if it was, remember here, we rounded up because it was closer to the 5, but sometimes we rounded down because it was closer to the lower inch. Okay, look ahead. You can measure objects to the nearest whole inch, half inch, and quarter inch. Usually fractions are not labeled on a ruler. The number line below the ruler labels the whole inch, half inch, and quarter inch marks on this ruler. So notice that their ruler looked like our ruler. But remember, we did stop and we talked about how this is 1/4, this is 1/2, this is 3/4, and then this is 1 inch. So we talked about what the little intervals mean. You can count by half inches on a ruler. Complete the count by half inches from 0 to 3 inches below. Now notice when they have labeled with the number line, they made all the half inches in red. So let's count the halves together. 0, 1/2, 1, 1 and 1/2, 2, 2 and 1/2, 3. We just counted by halves. Notice that we went halves with each of our sections. 0 inches, 1/2, 1 inch. Then we had 1 and 1/2 inches. Then we had 2. Then we had 2 and 1/2. Use this if you need to. Then we had 3 inches. What are the lengths of the red and blue pencils to the nearest half inch? Okay, so let's zoom in so you can see this. Our red pencil, look at that, our red pencil is exactly at 2 inches. So we don't have to do any estimating there. That's 2 inches. Now our blue pencil, it is in between. Do you notice that? It's bigger, larger than 1 1/2, but it's not quite 2. They wanted us to find the nearest 1/2 inch. So the nearest 1/2 inch would either be here or here. Is our pencil closer to 1 1/2 or is it closer to 2? It is closer to 1 1/2. So let's go back over to our information table, and it is closer to 1 1/2 inches. Okay, let me zoom back out. There we go. Now reflect. Explain how you found the links of the pencils to the nearest 1/2 inch in problem 2B. How did we do that here? Notice that I made a line, or they made a line. It helps to make a line. And then I compared it to the line graph down below. If you need to, you can do the same thing with your ruler. You can actually put the numbers in that help you with the estimating. So what did we do? We drew a line on the ruler. And then we also used a line graph to find the nearest 1/2 inch. Now you might have used some other strategies, and if you have more to write down, then go ahead and do that. Okay, now that is the end of session 1, my part. You are going to start working on session 1, the independent practice. They do have you talk about in your own words what the nearest inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/4 inch are, and I drew pictures to help me understand it. Then I went and solved and made a line plot on the back. I would like for you to do the same. Then when you are done, come back and watch video number 2.